Hello, my name is Emma, and today I will discuss traumatic brain injury. We will learn about injuries to specific parts of the brain and what we, as future teachers, can do to accommodate students suffering from a traumatic brain injury. Before we start going into specifics, it's important to have basic knowledge of what a traumatic brain injury is. According to the Brain Injury Association of America, a traumatic brain injury is an injury to the head from an external physical force. For example, a child can have a traumatic brain injury after being hit in the head while playing sports. Traumatic brain injury can be caused by motor vehicle accidents, impact in sports, stroke, and unfortunately, child abuse. TBI can affect physical functioning, cognitive abilities, and emotional functioning, which we will see throughout the presentation. Furthermore, TBI is often called a silent epidemic because of the sheer amount of injuries each year. In fact, 1.4 million people have traumatic brain injuries each year. This epidemic is also the leading cause of death and disability in children and young adults. Clearly, teachers need to be equipped with the knowledge about traumatic brain injury, as this video shows.
The main thing schools need to do to prepare for working with children with brain injury is make sure staff have a knowledge and understanding of the disability and what needs to be modified to work with these kids. And that's just not happening. So a couple of data points. We did a survey a couple of years back of teachers who are working with kids with brain injury in their classrooms right now. 85% of them said they had no training in TBI. And just recently, within the last few months, we did a look at special education textbooks that are used in universities across the country, the most frequently used textbooks in U.S. teacher preparation programs. 1 in 10 had a chapter on brain injury. So it's still quite off the radar in terms of higher education and in terms of training teachers. So it's no wonder that teachers don't feel prepared when they come into the classroom.
Now we are going to go into specific parts of the brain to better understand TBI, starting with the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is said to be where our personality resides. It is divided into left and right lobes. The left lobe controls language-related movement or moving your mouth and tongue to speak. The right lobe controls nonverbal abilities such as analyzing situations. The front lobe in its entirety is also responsible for emotions, motor function, language, judgment, and social behavior. There are many symptoms of a traumatic brain injury to the frontal lobe. One is the loss of fine movements, so a person may have trouble moving their fingers to lift a pencil. A person may also exhibit little behavioral spontaneity due to his injury, so he may not make different facial expressions to react to rapidly changing social situations. Another symptom of TBI to the frontal lobe is lower IQ scores. Furthermore, a person may have difficulties interpreting feedback from the environment, which has to do with decision making. A person may also have dramatic changes in social behavior, resulting in withdrawal in some cases from social situations. Now, we're going to move on to the parietal lobe. Overall, it has to do with sensory input and perception. It contains two functional regions. One side involves sensation and perception, while the other integrates sensory input. One symptom of injury to the left parietal lobe is Gertzmann syndrome, which includes confusion between left and right, difficulty in writing and math, language disorders, and inability to normally perceive objects. Damage to the right parietal lobe can result in contralateral neglect or neglecting part of the body or space. This can result in poor self-care skills such as washing and dressing. If there is damage to both lobes, it can result in Balint syndrome, which is a visual, attention, and motor syndrome. It can result in the inability to control gaze, inability to integrate parts of a visual scene, and inability to accurately reach for an object. Next, I'm going to talk about the occipital lobe, which primarily deals with visual perception, since it is where the optic nerves reside. Symptoms of traumatic brain injury include homonymous loss of vision, or when the same area of a person's sight is lost in both eyes, hallucinations, visual illusions, and also word blindness, which is when a person does not process certain words when read, and also writing impairments. Now for the cerebellum. The cerebellum is the center of basic motor and balance in the brain. It is also sometimes called the mini brain. It controls balance, coordination, works with the inner ear to control equilibrium, and contains muscle tone, and controls muscle tone. Not surprisingly, many of the symptoms of traumatic brain injury to the cerebellum involve basic motor issues. TBI to the cerebellum can manifest as loss of coordination, inability to judge distance, inability to perform rapid movements, movement tremors or uncontrolled movements, tendency to fall, and slurred speech. The next part of the brain is the temporal lobes. Each lobe has its own responsibilities. The left lobe is responsible for word recognition, while the right lobe is responsible for talking. Together, the temporal lobes organize sensory input and are in charge of memory skills. Injury to the temporal lobes can cause a variety of problems, including disturbances of auditory and visual input perception, poor organization of verbal material, so a student may not process directions, long-term memory problems, language comprehension issues, and altered personality and social behavior. Finally, we will discuss the brainstem. Its function is absolutely vital because it passes information from the body to the brain. Therefore, it is responsible for the most basic vital life functions: basic attention, arousal, and consciousness. Traumatic brain injury to the brainstem can result in difficulty standing, walking, performing basic motor functions, and performing daily activities such as maintaining personal hygiene. To end this presentation, I would like to talk about some accommodations teachers can make in their classrooms for a student with a traumatic brain injury. Teachers should present their instructions verbally, visually, and written. This way they can ensure their students are processing their information. Also, teachers need to break assignments into smaller parts to lower the stress on the student. Teachers additionally need to work with students to create a scheduler, whether electronic or handwritten, that helps keep their assignments organized. Reducing clutter in the classroom can also help students with a traumatic brain injury learn effectively because it helps them focus on less. During instruction and assessments, teachers need to check the students' understanding frequently, provide extra time, model proper social behaviors, and create assignments based on errorless learning. Errorless learning helps prevent the opportunity for a child to learn information incorrectly. One example of errorless learning is providing exercises with word banks so the student has less choices to make and has more of a chance of choosing the correct answer. To conclude this presentation, I would like to share an uplifting video that shows how recovery from a traumatic brain injury is possible and that lifelong success is possible afterwards. Thank you.
I got to tell you, George, with graduation season upon us, this is the best story we've heard in a long time. In 2011, 14-year-old Taylor Hale's parents were devastated by the news that she had suffered a severe brain injury. They never thought they would speak with her again and certainly couldn't imagine watching her walk in her high school graduation, but that's exactly what they'll be doing today. A high school diploma, the culmination of years of hard work. But for Taylor Hale, graduation will be nothing short of a miracle. Nearly 4 years ago, Taylor, like many other freshmen, was excited to spend time with friends after a high school football game.
I begged my mom to go.
Taylor's mom, Stacy, never expected what happened that night.
I got the phone and I heard her friend say that she was in an accident and that the ambulance was on its way.
As soon as they got to the hospital, Taylor's parents were presented with a troubling diagnosis from doctors.
They said it was, a very severe traumatic brain injury.
After a week in a medically induced coma, Taylor took a turn for the worse.
They woke me up about 3 in the morning to say that they had been doing CPR and life-saving measures for probably hour and a half, 2 hours.
That's when it was finally starting to sink in that she might not wake up.
When all seemed lost, Taylor's parents made a decision that some might think strange. They invited chiropractor Jeffrey Stickle, a complete stranger, to come to the hospital to help their daughter.
Her aunt and the family had been in for their chiropractic adjustments, and they just were asking if there's anything I could do.
Just hours before doctors were scheduled to take Taylor off life support, Dr. Stickle met the teen for the first time.
I just felt like if I could get my hands on her head and neck, that there was maybe a chance that there was an interference in there in her healing, and that's why she wasn't, waking up. I just remember my fingers kind of moving, and I could feel Taylor's energy, and she was definitely alive. She was not dying.
A few hours after Dr. Stickle left the hospital, doctors began taking Taylor off life support. What happened next shocked everyone.
The nurse came in and said that she said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but she's breathing on her own, and we don't know how or why."
Taylor continued to stun her doctors with her amazing recovery. She was walking and talking just 5 weeks after the accident. But leading experts say that recoveries from traumatic brain injuries like Taylor's are becoming increasingly more common.
Learning now that these previous notions that we had of what's impossible really are obsolete, and the human brain is much more resilient than we had ever given it credit for.
As for Taylor, she says she's just excited to graduate.
Afterwards, I feel like I'm going to be like the happiest person in the world because I did do it and I fought for my life and I finished high school and can go on to bigger and better things in my future.
Taylor's parents are thankful for the doctors, nurses, and therapists who cared for their daughter, and they are convinced that her recovery is the result of divine intervention. Now, as a commencement speaker, we're supposed to be the ones providing inspiration, but it's often graduates like Taylor who inspire us all.